group, which could be as large as 2,000 migrants, follows at least 2 others just this month, with some saying they're coming now because they're worried about what will happen after the November election.
So a large caravan of asylum seekers is headed towards the U.S. border, traveling north on foot through Mexico. And for months, we've heard that the border is now more secure than ever, with new restrictions in place, not only to limit crossings, but to restrict who can seek asylum to only those who come in through an official point of entry. And that makes the purpose of this caravan quite strange. Why would thousands of people journey to America if they can't stay once they arrive, unless their goal is to arrive in a sanctuary city like New York?
Mexico newspapers report at least 4,000 migrants are already on the move, and thousands more are leaving other Mexican cities. This, as many fear asylum in the U.S. may be cut back.
Well, it's probably manufactured. It's somebody in the organized crime level, or maybe one of these cartels that said, hey, this is the time to come. There's also an interest of the would-be migrants that are coming, that they think that things are going to change.
This Venezuelan migrant saying whoever wins should not close the doors to us and should give us support because we are all going through a bad time. He, like so many others, fleeing an oppressive government and looking for a better future.
New York City has spent more than $5 billion on the migrant crisis. The city projects combining the last 2 years, and this fiscal year, it's already spent $2.3 billion on just housing for migrants, with much of that going to hotels.
We know from the history of immigration enforcement in the interior that people are allowed to come into the United States under sometimes a specious asylum claim, and they don't want to be found by authorities after that. So previous to all these sanctuary cities in the United States, people who got arrested were the majority of people who were then deported. Now you're upwards of 10 million in the last 3 years. It's going to be a very difficult challenge.
So as a large group of people treks towards the southern border, some are wondering if there's more going on here than meets the eye. But what nobody's talking about is this is the exact scenario leaders of sanctuary cities like New York have been dreading for months, because they've been doing victory laps lately, congratulating themselves on what a great job the city's done handling its asylum crisis. For example, in New York, about 4,000 people a week would arrive seeking shelter, and now that number is down to about 700, which makes it look like this crisis could be winding down. And this 75% reduction in arrivals mirrors the 78% reduction in border crossings achieved over the last few months. And even though this is a recent development, the reduction in asylum seekers has caused the city to begin tearing down some of its more controversial tent shelters, like the facility on Randall's Island, which was so large it could house around 3,000 people, but was so poorly run that gang members had taken it over and were using it as a base for their criminal operations. But gangs and shelters, that's only one of the many issues this large caravan full of people could possibly unbalance. And it certainly isn't the main issue the city's concerned about, because although most of the 212,000 asylum seekers who've come here did not do so to join gangs or live lives of crime, elected officials and activists welcomed them off buses into our shelter system with the promise of a new beginning. A new beginning which ends in 1 or 2 months after they get evicted because the shelters are over capacity. Plus, the job market for asylum seekers is so bad, many of them have no way to earn a living or rent apartments of their own and are now sadly living in tents down by the river. And even with this recent decline in border crossings, our shelter population is still sitting stagnant at around 60,000 individuals, revealing that, if anything, our asylum crisis here is far from over. But the real reason this large caravan full of individuals is of concern for our leaders here in New York is because if a whole bunch of new folks show up and we've torn down our shelters, we're just going to have to set them right back up, which could mean facilities like the violence-plagued Randall's Island shelter stay open for a lot longer than anyone had hoped, because New York's extremely generous right-to-housing requirement mandates that they give anyone who asks a place to stay. Something that's especially important for the thousands fleeing poverty south of our border right now, who, as you're about to see, are being deceived into believing that with the help of gang members and cartels, they too can have their shot at the American dream. And speaking of cartels and gang members, they're earning so much money from the crisis at our border that they've got every reason to try and subvert recent security measures there. And by doing so, people will be forced to make their way to sanctuary cities like New York. So with a large number of people on their way to the United States headed for the southern border, we could see a surge in arrivals at bus terminals like this in New York if people manage to use cartels and gangs to get them around recent restrictions that have been implemented over the last couple of months. And the reason these cartels and gang members have a new business opportunity on their hands is because the border is very different today than it was a year ago. Recently implemented restrictions means the number of daily allowed crossings is a lot lower than it used to be. And sadly, many folks in a very desperate situation can't wait indefinitely at the border. They're running low on resources and they're turning to the criminal underworld for faster passage into the country. And sadly, the criminal underworld doesn't want to lose money because of new restrictions from some government like the US government. There's just too much money at stake for them.
So it's long been kind of this understanding of sorts that the Mexican cartel stays over in Mexico. They don't fire on or attack US law enforcement because it's bad for business. But there has been basically a war within the Sinaloa cartel, and that prompted this alert that we actually obtained, that cartel operatives have actually...
So it unfortunately looks like things are about to get a lot more dangerous at the U.S. border because these cartels, there's recently been infighting among them, and the way that they handle U.S. law enforcement is about to change. Prior to this recent power struggle, the cartel was content to make money off smugglers and gang members accessing the border through its territory. But now, due to recent increased border security, the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents, they're doing more, and they're also getting help from their counterparts in Mexico. So there's way more law enforcement along these routes than there used to be. And that is what's costing the bad guys a lot of money because they cannot ferry people through the border around our restrictions so that they can then make their way wherever they'd like in the country. Now, the cartel in question here that is undergoing an internal factional dispute, it's the Sinaloa cartel, and that name might not mean much to you, but it's actually the same cartel that was being run by El Chapo, who we all remember, one of the most dangerous people on the planet. His sons took over after him, and now there's this internal squabbling over who should be in charge of this and who gets to control what territory. And unfortunately for our border guards, their lives are now at risk because some of the members fighting for control over this dangerous group want to change how they interact with law enforcement.
The number one reason they fight for these plazas is because these plazas are the corridors to enter the United States, whether California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And that's not just fighting for the plazas, but fighting for the leadership of both of these, which happens to be one cartel now basically.
So we're not just witnessing fighting over who gets to run this gang of criminals, we're also witnessing fighting over who controls access to the U.S. border in general. Because whoever controls access to the U.S. border, that's the gang, that's the group that's gonna get paid when smugglers and other people want to access it. And I didn't know this, but apparently smuggling people into the country, it's a $13 billion a year industry. That's a lot. And that explains a lot why these cartels are so well funded and so heavily armed and so dangerous. They're making billions off of this every single year. And now the fear is that a reaction to increased border restrictions and an upcoming presidential transition period may cause many people to think that this is their last chance to enter the country, and there might be a surge of activity at the border that these cartels are going to take advantage of. And look at this, these cartels are actually using drone disruptors to blind Border Patrol agents while they're trying to keep people safe and secure the border at the same time. This is a very sophisticated operation they've got going on. It's almost like a paramilitary group operating right there on the very outskirts of America's doorstep, offering people their chance to come into the country and achieve something not possible in the dangerous places many of them have fled. And now the fear is that if these criminals decide to turn their full attention against the U.S. border right now while it's in a state of flux, all of the recent security gains and victories that have recently been achieved could be in jeopardy. So the reason that the situation at the border is so contentious right now is because all of the security we're witnessing relies on three different parties to achieve. First, you've got the Customs and Border Patrol. Second, you've got the Mexican government. And third, you've got how willing these gangs are or aren't to interact with the other two. But these caravans that are on the way right now, they've got to travel through Mexico. And that's got some saying that the Mexican government could be doing more to help out with securing the border from their end. Because the only way these dangerous gang members and criminals can play on people's fears is if they've got the ability to do that from where they pick these people up until when they reach the border itself and then charge them money to get through it.
What do you make of this caravan and then the timing of it going into the election?
Well, it's probably manufactured. It's somebody in the
organized crime level, or maybe one of these cartels that said, hey, this is the time to come. There's also an interest of the would-be migrants that are coming, that they think that things are going to change potentially after the election.
So this is a former Customs and Border Patrol and ICE director, and what he says is that these caravans are criminally orchestrated. They're not the work of some government sending people to our country. These are gangs trying to take advantage of a situation that they've tricked people into believing may only exist right now. And they're telling people that in just a few weeks there will be a new president on the way and a new administration that may have very different policies to what have existed in the past. And it seems like the tactics of fear are working, because thousands of people are taking these gangs up on their last chance trip to America. And fascinatingly, voters on both the left and on the right both value border security very highly this election cycle, higher than in past election cycles across both party lines. And these cartels very well may be justified in telling people that this is their last chance to take advantage of a border system that may be different in just a few weeks. And that raises a big question, because these cartels and these gangs, we know that they're dangerous, we know that they are heavily armed, and we know that they're operating freely in Mexico. Isn't that bad for Mexico? And shouldn't the Mexican government be doing more to try and stop them? Or are they doing all they can and these gangs are still ending up getting through?
It remains to be seen what Mexico will do with people as they're transiting, because they have been helping in, not sort of a consistent way, but there's more that they can do to share the responsibility for this flow and protect people, right? Because you have this massive flow like that. People are being exploited, and the smugglers and the cartels.
So, of course, there's debate among U.S. analysts over how much Mexico is or isn't doing. Obviously, they know this is a problem. Obviously, this is something that they want to stop. Maybe, after all, this is the best that they can do. But either way, it's an issue, and it may only get worse before it gets better. Because another matter allegedly complicating this entire situation are the border policies currently being employed. And those policies work like this: if someone's caught entering the country, they'll likely be apprehended and released into the country while waiting for a court date or an immigration hearing. And although this policy is arguably way more humane than sending people back to a country that they came from that might be ravaged by war or famine or both, it's also a policy critics say allows folks to take advantage of. For example, if they're released into the country, they could come to a sanctuary city like New York and kind of disappear and not worry about deportation if their immigration hearing isn't successful. And that's because in a sanctuary city like New York, immigration status does not matter to local officials, including police. It's never going to come up, and it's thought that one can live a relatively normal life here, free from worrying about whether or not they're supposed to be in the country. But that reveals the real issue facing New York City right now. If there is another border surge, invariably people will come here, and the reason that's a potential problem for city leaders is because of New York City's right to shelter policies, which many say are the reason the asylum crisis here has reached such proportions. But it's not like those policies are perfect. In fact, after 30 days, single adults over the age of 23 get evicted from shelter, and they're not supposed to come back. Families and people who are under the age of 23 get longer initial placements and are able to reapply without being forcefully evicted. But that system doesn't actually help anybody.
Where do you begin, no matter who is elected, to address what we're seeing with the influx?
Well, we have to adhere to the rule of law. People are allowed to come into the United States under sometimes a specious asylum claim, and they don't want to be found by authorities after that. So previous to all these sanctuary cities in the United States, people who got arrested.
So this is where the whole idea of sanctuary city status and who it actually helps is coming up, because even though a person who's hardworking and well-meaning, even though they might be able to benefit from a sanctuary city, because everything that goes on here is in violation, in a sense, of federal law, that person's ability to get a work permission from a valid source and live a normal life is hampered, even though this might be a place that says it is immigrant friendly. And you know what that does? That may be attracting people who come here and don't have any intention of trying to live a normal life or become part of our society in a meaningful way. These may be people who are criminals and gang members who are wanted on a federal level and are just here hoping that nobody finds out. And even if someone's in a sanctuary city, every single thing they do from the moment they decide that they're going to exist off the books has to be off the books. And that will invariably drag law-abiding, well-meaning people into the criminal underworld, whether they like it or not, because that's the only answer. And that manifests itself in ways that are rather unexpected. If you take a look at some of the street vending we've got going on in areas of town like Queens, you'll see hundreds of people working off-the-book jobs. Now, that doesn't mean that these people are all criminals, but it also means that they have to do things that are, again, under the table, so to speak, in order to even get ahead. And if someone comes here and that's the only option that they can pursue, that just leaves them as a ripe opportunity, so to speak, for these criminals to exploit, which has a lot to do with why they're coming here. They're coming here to exploit people because it's a sanctuary city. Meanwhile, the industrial shelter complex that we've built up here, since it's evicting people on a regular basis, leaving those people without the means to provide for themselves because it's not part of a greater goal for actually lifting people up and helping them better their lives, that too creates an opportunity for criminals, because you may have people that are here with a valid asylum claim that could actually stay in the country and will be approved at some point. But since they're kicked out of shelters and this place is so expensive, these cartels can say, hey, it's either a tent down by the river or it's a spot on the sidewalk on Roosevelt Avenue with your blanket full of tools that came from Home Depot. And of course, this is all made worse by the fact that our city is not a law and order city in the sense that people are actually punished for the crimes that they commit, which adds another dimension to the levels of criminality that are allowed to flourish here in New York, unlike anywhere else in America. And that makes you wonder, are the people who are selling things on our streets trying to survive, are they there by choice, or are they there for some other purpose? Are they trying to pay off some sort of debt to the people that helped them enter the country in the first place? These are frightening questions that nobody really seems to want to ask or get the answers to. And the question now is, if somebody wants to be a law-abiding immigrant, how exactly does coming to a sanctuary city help them? After all, asylum seekers can reside anywhere in America that they want once they've filed their claim. And this idea that New York is a wonderful sanctuary for immigrants kind of falls apart when you realize that ICE isn't out here looking for people who have an asylum claim pending and are legally allowed to reside in the country in the first place. Sanctuary city status isn't allowing us to hide people or keep them safe because there's no threat to them. They're allowed to legally reside in the country. At the exact same time, sanctuary city status doesn't benefit people from a humanitarian perspective. It's not like we're teaching folks how to survive in New York and get corporate jobs and offices. We're not doing that. We're just moving them into shelter facilities and then telling them to move out. On top of that, sanctuary cities, we're not able to give people federal work authorization. We're not able to give people anything other than a temporary place to stay. That's it. But we are able to give criminals the opportunity to do things they can't do anywhere else. Is that a problem? I think so. But what really matters is what you think. Do you think that sanctuary cities like New York are going to be the best place for people to travel to if they've come into the country legally and cannot apply for an asylum claim with any hope of getting approved? And is that a problem for border security in general? And the restrictions that we've got right now, are they too much? Are they not enough? Should we increase border security? And will anybody running for president make a big difference when it comes to that national policy of this country? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.